Okay, great. Thanks. Hello, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on from where you're joining us today. My name is Abel Ndasho, and I'm the program coordinator for the IMMANA program based at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Thank you very much for joining us for this informational webinar on IMMANA grants round 4. The focus of today's webinar will be to introduce the competitive research grants on innovative methods and metrics for agriculture and nutrition actions, that is the IMMANA grants, and the IMMANA evidence and gap map. At the end of the webinar, we hope participants will be able to know more about the IMMANA evidence and gap map, about the IMMANA grants selection process, and how this round differs from the previous 3 rounds. To help us understand more about the IMMANA grants, IMMANA evidence gap map, and to answer all your questions, we have with us today Sunita Kadiala, IMMANA Principal Investigator, Ore Kolade, IMMANA Program and Grants Funding Manager, and Thalia Sparling, IMMANA Research Fellow. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few technical items so we all know how to participate in today's webinar. First, this webinar will be recorded and will be available on our website. All participants have been muted, but please introduce yourself using the chat function. Let us know your name, where you're based, and also the organization that you work with. You can access the chat box by clicking the chat button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Later in the session, we will open up the conversation with a Q&A session. If you have questions, we invite you to share them in the chat box throughout the webinar. You can send your question at any time, and we'll do our best to raise them during the Q&A time. And if we have time, we may ask you to raise your hands so that you can ask your question using the audio function. If at any point you experience any technical issues, please check your audio setting and also your internet connection. If lost, please try to reconnect using the same link that we've sent you on email. I think that's it from me for now. I'll now pass the mic to Ore to start the presentation. Ore, over to you.
Hi, a warm welcome to everyone joining us today, wherever you are in the world, and special greetings to American friends who are celebrating Thanksgiving today. As Abel said, my name is Ore Kolade, and I'm the IMMANA Program and Grants Funding Manager. And I'll start today's session by giving a brief introduction to the IMMANA program for those of us who may not be familiar with it. Next slide. The Innovative Methods and Metrics for Agriculture and Nutrition Actions Program started about 6 years ago and is funded by the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO, which is previously known as DFID, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The program aims to improve nutrition and health by strengthening tools, capacity and evidence in agriculture and food systems research. And we're currently in phase 2 of the program, which started last year. To achieve our vision, IMMANA has set out an ambitious program of work, which includes the Competitive Research Grants Program for the development and validation of innovative methods and metrics. I will be talking more about that here today. We also have the Fellowships Program aimed at emerging leaders in agriculture and food systems, nutrition and health research. For those who might be interested, the call for applications for the fellowships is also open, so please visit our website for more details. And we have the Synthesis Center for Agriculture and Nutrition Research and the Agriculture, Nutrition and Health Academy, which is a global community of researchers, practitioners, and policymakers who are all working together towards improved nutrition and health. The ANH Academy also convenes the annual ANH Academy Week, made up of learning labs and an abstract-driven conference. So far, we've funded 23 grants over 3 rounds so far, and this is a 4th and final round of the awards program. This has just been a quick whistle-stop tour of IMMANA. So if you want more details about the IMMANA program overall, about the grants we've funded so far, about the impact that we've made, please visit our website for more details. I'll now hand over to Sunitha, who will talk about the IMMANA round 4 grant priorities and the selection criteria. Thank you.
Thank you, Ore, and hello everyone. Hope you're all doing well and safe wherever you are. The key to the IMMANA programs is IMMANA grants is to make sure, especially in this first and final round, to focus on priority themes. So the first thing that IMMANA does is it focuses on methods, metrics, and tools, which is really methodologically driven, and it is really important to understand the difference between a methods, metrics, and tools driven grants program or an endeavor, and an impact evaluation or understanding an important research question. So for example, a question of, does this have an impact on that, or does something an exposure X, how is it linked to Y, is an important research question, right? But what we are trying to do here is not obviously any method. To do that, we need a method, metric, or a tool, a way to collect data, a way to analyze data, a study design that helps us answer questions. So we are really focusing on the methodology part of it rather than the research question part of it. So that is the key. That is a key difference between the usual grants which we are used to writing in general, and what we and IMMANA, which is sort of niche and different. And actually, it took me some time to understand how to communicate that. So if you have any questions or you want any clarifications on what you mean, do let me know, or let us know, and any one of us can answer. The second thing is that it is important to situate this within the context of agriculture food systems broadly defined. Again, it's in the RFP on how we define methods, metrics, and tools, how we define agriculture, nutrition, health, food systems, all these things. So do pay attention to that, because we do, and the review teams do, and all the committees on the selection panel do. So you want to please do pay attention, and we define it to be quite broadly and generously in a way, because we know that this topic is huge. The kinds of health and nutrition issues we look at could be several agriculture food systems is a big topic, and within that we are also looking at drivers of agriculture food systems, for example, climate change, sustainability, so on and so forth, right? So it's a huge thing that we are talking about. So make sure that you situate whatever, maybe you're collecting a data tool and it's not clear, a tool itself might be agnostic to a topic, right? But you want to tell the reviewers and the selection panel how this matters for agriculture, nutrition, and health linkages. So you need to situate that within that context. So those two are absolutely important. Then comes, okay, within that, what are the priority themes? We have funded quite a lot, and what we have done in this round is to deprioritize the ones where we do think either us or someone else has developed these tools and there is a momentum behind that. And our priority themes for this round 4 are based on what Thalia Sparling will introduce a little later about the evidence and gap map, which we also alluded to in the RFP. More than alluded, we wrote quite a lot about it. So these, what we want and what we are seeking here is methods, metrics, and tools on these topics in the context of agriculture, nutrition, and health. These topics are really about, the first two are really about context, right? There is a lot of research in normal, every non-emergency context, like some peaceful part of some country. But what we don't have is how do research and methods and metrics and tools used in agriculture, nutrition, and health linkages in the context of humanitarian crisis, political conflict, fragile states, and those kinds of complex emergencies, right, or natural disasters. So there is not that much at all, as Thalia will show you later. There is also, and we invite you to actually analyze the evidence and gap map for some of these things. The second thing is long-term vulnerability and fragility. We also know that while there is humanitarian crisis, there are a lot of micro stressors that build up, right? Climate change or low level of conflict or something happening in the community. Maybe there's large scale deforestation happening, slowly. But there is creating a long-term vulnerability, and fragility of ecosystems or people or livelihoods. And we would like we invite proposals in that context. Again, migration and displacement, either through complex humanitarian contexts or because of those long-term fragility issues. So that is something we are extremely interested in. We are also interested in food system governance, political economy, norms and values. There is a lot of hardcore, maybe metrics around how to measure women's empowerment, for example, how better to measure costs of diet we have. But when most often we say, oh, the governance of food systems is important, it's all about political economy, in this country we value that or this, but there is not enough tools, methods, or metrics to research that. Yeah, so again, that is a gap that we have identified in the evidence and gap map. So we would like that. There is a lot on production side, or there is a lot on consumption side, actually, in this research, but really not that much around methods, metrics, and tools for understanding trade or measuring some of those relationships, markets, value chains. This is not to say there is no research on this topic. I'm just saying this is about, remember, methods, metrics, and methods around how to understand these linkages at a systems level, right? Not at a household level necessarily, or an individual level where consumption metrics are based, or even an intra-household level. But we are really talking about a meso and macro level systems at this point. Again, related to food system governance and political economy and all that is also about power and how power manifests itself, conflicts of interest. We always say food industry must be engaged. There is a lot of push for private sector to be engaged. But how do we? That is great. That's fine if that is important for whichever stakeholder group that might be. But then how do we understand how these relationships are playing out in determining health and nutritional status of people? So this kind of research is now under the rubric of commercial determinants of health. So we are quite interested. There's a lot of writing on it, but I think the metrics are only just emerging. So we would like to do that. Equity and inclusion, there is a lot on women's empowerment, but that is not equity. Equity means it's between groups, right? I mean, it is about between men and women, between different ethnicities, between different geographies. So we are really interested in the equity angle. And we have deprioritized women's empowerment, but look at the language we have used in the RFP, because there is quite a lot of momentum around that metric, thankfully. Obviously, it would be remiss of us to not think about pandemics and nutrition, especially pandemics, obviously in the context of how to understand maybe risk of, agriculture, food systems, vulnerability to pandemics. How do we do that? Some risk assessments. These are all the examples I'm just giving in terms of thinking about it. So these topics are something that we will prioritize. We will absolutely prioritize this time. And actually, we will be looking at this in our eligibility criteria itself. If they don't meet this, or actually if there is something that has come up that is not here, we are not saying this is the ultimate truth in life, but if you look at the gap map, use it and convince us on saying, actually, you know what, in this gap map, I found the following things in my area of expertise, and therefore I'm proposing. That's something we will definitely consider. But this is really where there is not enough. We have done that too, and we have come up with this, yeah. So please pay close attention to that. So those are the topics. What are the kinds of innovation in tools, methods, and metrics are we talking about here? Strangely, while there is a lot of modeling that has happened, innovations in modeling, there is not that much in study designs. For example, of course, there is RCTs and there is quasi-experimental designs. But beyond that, we don't really see how do you do realist evaluations or surveillance methods or any other kind of study designs that one can think of. And there is not that much there. So we are really interested. It can't be that there are 2 or 3 robust designs and not much more. So right, we want to look at the use of innovation in study designs or use of this applied in this context. Participatory research methods we have, and qualitative methods. These are all, again, when we say methods and metrics, there is a tendency to think numerically. Right? I mean, that's not what we are saying here. But, what we are saying here is that it's a way of observing the data, on capturing the data, or analyzing the data. And all research needs data, whether it's quantitative or qualitative. That is what we are talking about here. Now, there is a lot of, so we are quite interested in those as well, because we do find that as a gap in terms of in the method, in the gap map. The fourth one down here is on instruments and devices. By here, there's a lot of mobile-based applications. And so with the exception of that, there are lots of examples, again, in the gap map report. Please do read. So again, there are fewer innovations in that area on how to use various instruments and devices to capture data, measure data, analyze data, so on and so forth. Again, as I said, system level tools, methods, and metrics. How do we understand trade relationships or power or market value chains or fragility of, when you say fragility of markets, what does it even mean? Things like that you want to think about. Implementation research. Again, it says, how do we better understand, implement? There's a whole topic called delivery science or implementation research. So how do we further that in a way that we are learning from our implementation of various programs or policies, so on and so forth. Now, there is also a need for dynamic surveillance, ongoing real-time research and innovation. If this pandemic has taught us one thing, it is that, having these kinds of dynamics or surveillance systems would have really helped us, in understanding how the pandemic is evolving, how the prices are changing, how people are how their livelihoods are getting affected, and what does this mean for food systems and their ability to actually to nourish populations in a healthy and sustainable way, right? So again, there is not that much innovation in those kinds of methodologies, and we welcome proposals on that. Eligibility, this time we will be a little more, I would say, much more strict in terms of asking people to respect the eligibility criteria here when they apply. One is you have to demonstrate in the concept note that it is you are proposing a proposal that is that can meet the international standards of excellence in science. Of course, you will have more opportunities, of course, in the full proposal stage to demonstrate even further. But in the concept note, within the word limit, you will still need to somehow, which we do, right, routinely. We all write proposals, and we just need to demonstrate that this has merit. This has so much potential. You want to convince the panel that. The second is really about priority themes and topics. I cannot stress this enough. Please, we are looking for proposals on these topics which are underrepresented, and we will look at that, what is there, but also if that is not there, and there has to be a compelling reason to why you're proposing a new thing, and do please convince us on that, or the panel on that. Demonstrate a strong and equitable partnership. I must confess that this last round was not, there were partnerships, but we had to engage with that a bit further to understand what these partnerships are. But what we would like here is like is a more thoughtful statements and plans for how we are going to engage with your partners in an equitable way, both across countries as well as across disciplines, right? So and I'll come to that in a bit. So on the evaluation criteria, so once you pass the eligibility criteria, once we say, yes, this looks great on these three things, then it'll go for further evaluation to see if we would invite you to the full proposal stage or not. So there are two tracks, as was the case last time, a development concept note and a validation or application concept note. So you need to tell us which one you're applying for and why that is the right track. So development is like you're developing something new, as is obviously obvious from that. It has to be innovative. There has to be a reason why you're developing this and what the need is. And validation is something is already developed, but it needs to be validated either in a true epidemiological sense or in some other ways. It's a new context and novel application, and again, we give a quite a broad definition, not even a definition, articulation of what we mean by validation, because we don't want to what do you call, alienate non-epi public health people to think that it is validation. It's like it has to be about construct validity and it has to be about face validity in that metric science one. Those are of course very, very welcome, but we want, because not every discipline has that way of thinking, we invite validation. For example, how does this tool perform in two different contexts, cross-contextual equivalence and things like that. Just have a look and read about what we mean by validation. So the scientific criteria, evaluation criteria are scientific excellence, which is the rationale. You need to provide us the rationale, which is of course standard, and methodology. And this is where I think people are good at providing a rationale. In this phase, it's not, but however, I want to stress one thing here is, because we want you to situate it in the gap map and help us understand why this is important, you need to have, the proposals need to have more than, yes, the gap map identified as the gap. Right? I mean, this is not about lip service. It's about really thinking about, what does it say? Because the gap map, actually, if the more you click, the more analysis you can do. So since it's your field, it would be interesting and important to engage with that, not just for this proposal, but I also think in general, it would be quite meaningful to do that. So that would be important in the rationale on how you justify it, both from a larger sense, from the field sense, but also for methods and metrics, much more with the gap map. The second is, of course, like anyone, all of us write research proposals and we're quite used to it, is describing the methodology. Now, the concept note, of course, we don't expect a complete full-blown explanation of the methodology, but it should be quite thoughtful about what are the kinds of methods and metrics you're developing, why, how would you go around it, what are the steps that you would think about. If you're invited for the full proposal, we would expect a complete, like you would apply for your medical research council or some other research council in wherever you're from. We would expect a methodology to be developed in the following manner, and not broad principles of I will conduct some interviews and then I'll do some cognitive testing, without really telling us, okay, with all this data, what would you do with this data to actually arrive at the metric? That level of detail will be important in the full proposal stage, but at the concept note stage, you need to convince the panel, that you're thinking about it and the broader ways of doing that. The second one is, people tend to focus on the first part of the scientific excellence and forget about the second part. I cannot stress how important it is for IMMANA, and thankfully all our grantees have delivered on this, is on the research uptake plans and pathways to impact. First of all, what is the demand for your research? Which stakeholders are demanding this? How will you create a demand if there is no demand? What are the specific ways in which you're thinking about engaging with this larger community so that either the research methods and metric tool you're developing is taken up by researchers or practitioners or policymakers. I think that thinking has to happen a priori. For IMMANA, it is, we are it will be scored alongside everything else, and it will be discussed quite a lot. And therefore, just saying we will be developing the metric, we'll engage and disseminate it, you might not score as high. So you want to be thoughtful and proactive in how you put up those plans. Then collaboration, I said about equitable partnerships. This is just not in this this is a part of the eligibility criteria, right? Also, that tells you how important it is for the donors and for IMMANA team to have equitable partnerships that is reflected in all aspects of research life cycle. It is just not about time, it's not just about time or budget. It's also about decision making, responsibility, governance of various people within the research team. So think about how we are going to craft that research team, and how you're going to resource it, and what kind of responsibilities you're sharing across your research team throughout the project life cycle, and what mechanisms are in place. Interdisciplinarity. If it's ANH is in agriculture, nutrition, and health is a hugely interdisciplinary team. You're all working on it. So I know you appreciate it. So we would like you to demonstrate it. It's however good a nutritionist you are, you will not score highly if you're not engaging with some other sector, because you have, because we think for the kind of methods, metrics, and tools we are looking for, you will need that a context expert if you're thinking of humanitarian crisis, a person who understands livelihoods in those crises, an economist who understands how economy functions in those crises, so on and so forth. So you need to draw upon this and demonstrate it. That's it from me, and I'm happy to answer any further questions, and I'll ask Ore to take it further.
Okay, thanks, Anita. So we've highlighted a few things here that we want you to take note of when putting your budget together. Please bear in mind that all applications, even at the concept note stage, will be scrutinized for value for money. So please pay attention to your balance between your staff salary costs and the direct costs. In some applications, you see that staff are costed at about 70% or 75% of the budget, then everything else is direct costs, and you find it hard to justify, value for money in that sort of scenario. So please pay attention to those sort of balances. Note that the costing is in GBP, and so please use realistic exchange rates, especially when converting from currencies which are not in pound sterling. And also, please note that attendance at the ANH Academy Week is mandatory. This usually rotates between a country in Africa and Asia. It was held virtually this year, but we're hoping that we can revert to in-person attendance from next year. So please budget for that in 2022 and 2023, which is when the grants start in 2022. Sorry, next slide.
Yeah. Okay.
For the review process, it's a two-stage process. We have the concept note stage and we have the full proposal stage. The concept note stage will be assessed by the IMMANA team with oversight from the co-chairs of the IMMANA independent panel of experts. And like Sunita alluded to initially, about the eligibility checks, only concept notes which pass the scrutiny of the initial eligibility checks will fully assessed. So if you don't meet those sort of three criteria, then your concept note will not be fully assessed. So for instance, if your concept note is out of scope of the RFP or doesn't demonstrate strong and equitable partnerships, it's unlikely to make it to the full review stage. Just some statistics here. In the last round, round 3, we had 78 applications submitted and 11 proposals didn't meet with the eligibility checks and were dropped and didn't make it to the full the concept note review. And then we have the full proposal stage, concept notes, which make it to the full proposal stage, will be assessed by 2 peer reviewers and 2 IPE members. And that will be followed by an IPE panel meeting where each proposal will be discussing in detail. Usually we have 2 discussants and 2 people who've actually read and reviewed it and scored. And then they will present the final recommendations to the steering committee, who will give the final approval on the awards, which will be selected. Some other statistics to share here. 33 concept notes, so that's 42% of concept notes made it to the full proposal stage, in which the 8 were finally selected. So what have we learned from previous rounds? There's some they say, I've heard, I'm not sure who said it actually, they say the lesson we learn from history is people don't learn from history. And we're sharing this because we want you to learn from from mistakes people have made, not just in round 3, but in rounds 1 and 2. So these are some common mistakes that have been repeated over the last 3 rounds that we need to learn from. And if you avoid these common errors in your application, then your chances of having a successful application will be that much higher. So as Sunitha has mentioned, this round is the final round. We're looking at the scope, and we will be paying attention to and prioritizing those concept notes that fall squarely within the scope of this RFP. So there's so many applications where you wonder, people haven't actually taken the time to read through the RFP carefully before applying. So please pay attention to these requirements. Look at the issues of partnerships, and not just in your budget, like Cynthia mentioned, but ensuring that that it's really represented, in terms of the governance structures, like Cynthia had mentioned earlier on. Okay, so some additional considerations. Also from experience, we've learned that at the subcontracting stage, there are clauses in the terms and conditions that people aren't very happy with, and that then results in a drawn out negotiation process and causes delays to grants. So please, even at this stage, let your legal team review the draft terms and conditions on our website, and let them confirm that they're happy to proceed, because there's very little wiggle room in there in terms of negotiations. If you have any questions or need any clarifications, then please reach out to us at immanagrants@lshcm.ac.uk. Also, regarding exchange rates, we've had situations in the past where, because of Brexit or other situations, there's been, currency fluctuations, and that's then had an impact on the funding for projects. We're not able to make any changes to the budgets once they're agreed. So please factor this in, look at what the risks are, and factor those currency fluctuations into your budget, especially if you're not based in the UK. Okay, so just a final note on the timelines. The deadline is 21st of January, and with invitations to submit for full proposals on the 15th February. Please note that these are not set in stone, particularly the invitation to submit for full proposals, and they're subject to minor changes, as is all of the timelines that we've set out there, but hopefully not too many changes. Okay, I'll now hand over to Thalia Sparlin, who will take us through the IMMANA evidence and gap map. Thank you.
I'll stop sharing. Yeah.
Yes. Great. Can everybody see my screen and hear me now? Wonderful. So I am going to present the map that we built, and today I'm going to spare you from all of the methodological background that helped us contribute to this. But this map that you're seeing is, it comprises 900, just over 900 studies. And actually, it's a little too small then, but that is the whole map. So if you go onto the ANH Academy website, or you search for evidence in GABMAP, you'll see this as its own page. And on that page, there are several documents and tutorials and videos that help explain this. So if you don't catch everything today, know that there are resources out there for you to use. So what you see here is an interactive map, and on the left are these different thematic domains that have been derived from these well-known theoretical pathways that were devised to describe the complex relationships and pathways that link agriculture, food systems to nutrition. And on the columns, you see different types of tools, metrics, and methods. So they're segregated by different types of tools, technology tools specifically, because there's a lot of tech that's being applied in this space. And then other types of research, survey, and interview tools. Metrics are sort of discrete. So this is indices and measures here in metrics, and then other types of methods, which often is types of analyses and models. And then there's also a research design category. So in each cell, you will see bubbles, and the bubbles, size of the bubble corresponds to the number of reports in that cell, and the colors represent a coding that we gave that generally indicates basically nascent pilot development up to, in blue, up to red, which is widespread application. So this would be something that has turned into a global standard that's used across many countries, etc. So when you scroll over the cell, you'll see a little summary, as you can see here on my screen. And then what's quite cool about this map is if you click on the cell, it will pull up all of the studies within that cell. And these, you can see their color coding, you can read their abstract, you can see the authors and the references. So we see quite a lot of studies in this space, which is methods on primary food production. So we had, I think, I will just point out that in the last round, we asked people to use this map, because this is the map that was, this was the project that we did to, as a capstone to the first round of IMMANA grants, which was a task where we summarized the field of development and thinking around agriculture, food systems, nutrition, and health. And then onto that, we overlaid what we had contributed through IMMANA in the grant, in the broader milieu of work in this area. And the task was then to say, okay, what has been prolific, what has been popular, what has really come out as established methods, and where is there more opportunity for development in much needed areas. And Sunita went through some of those findings in quite a lot of detail, so I won't dwell on those. But I want to make an important point, which is that just because in this cell of analysis and models, which are methods on primary food production, that doesn't mean we aren't going to fund anything at this nexus. It means that we ask you to use this map as as guidance and justification for your proposal. So if you want to go into this, you'll see quite a lot of, for instance, Bayesian networks. Now, Bayesian networks aren't new. They definitely existed prior to the last decade of research, but the application to the ANH space we determined was fairly new, and we there was a lot on that. So if you're proposing to use Bayesian analysis, we encourage you to actually really go through these studies and see if what you're doing is different from what is already out there, because we will also be assessing the relevance of a proposal based on these findings. And these, if you're borrowing from another field, those studies won't necessarily appear here, and that might be also a justification because they haven't been applied very specifically to these connections between agriculture, food systems, and nutrition. So again, you know, we see a lot. This big red bubble, I can tell you, is that is water footprint assessments, which basically quantify the amount of water traded or used in certain crops and certain regions for agricultural production as a whole in different sectors of agriculture. So if you're proposing water footprint, a new way of doing water footprint assessment, you really need to, it's not that we won't fund that, but we would need a strong justification for why your method is quite different. Similarly, with a web-based app or a phone technology, there has been quite a lot of that in dietary metrics. And so we would ask that you, these are all the studies that use mobile web apps and software to look at specifically diets. So if you're developing an app for healthy diets, we would say, okay, there's a lot of those out there. You really would need to justify why your development of that technology is going to contribute to new insights in this space. Similarly, I think the last important point I will make is that these gaps don't mean that there is nothing in those cells forever and ever. It means that there was an absence of new things developed in the last 10 years. And so we do encourage people to take a look at what's out there. So if it's an economic model that is quite popular and well established, of course it's not new, it's well defined. If you're going to innovate on that, that might be something quite interesting for us. Or if you're going to use political economy analysis, you would just need to show that it's being used in quite a novel way. So lastly, I'm just going to walk you through some filters that we have. So this is an interactive resource and you can filter the map. So if you're interested in seeing only studies in Africa, you can select Africa and you can update this, and the bubbles scaling and population of these cells will change. You can untoggle them or you can refresh and it will go back to the beginning. And then this might be, it seems overwhelming at first, but the very cool thing is that we've provided, beyond the sort of stage of development and the main domains, we've provided quite a lot of very specific tags, which each report is coded on special characteristics or cross-cutting themes. So we had a question about aquaculture, and I can update the map with only studies that have an aspect of aquaculture in them. So even if you're looking at food safety or economy or a technology tool or something else, you can actually see what's in that space based on this map. And I think we're encouraging people to go beyond saying this is a gap, so it's needed, and really delving into your specific sector and using this as a justification for your proposal. If you find yourself lost, we'd be happy to answer questions. For instance, Sunita also mentioned the aspects of equity and gender that we're interested in. So this is a very long list, but we do have this filter here, which you could use, and that will update with those metrics, methods, and tools that inherently, not just in how they're applied necessarily, but really as a part of the tool itself or the method itself, encompasses certain measurement aspects of equity. So you can look through those. So again, there are many, many different characteristics to explore here, and we certainly look forward to any feedback or questions on how you could use this and how we might improve it. And yeah, I think that's all from me. I would ask Sunita just to contribute anything else that I might have forgotten.
Nothing much. I think you did an excellent job of articulating what we want out of this and how to use this as an analytical tool. So please do use that, and that's all we can encourage. And the more you make an attempt, I think the more you're likely to convince a very large set of panelists and peer reviewers and steering committee members, so on and so forth. So, yeah.
Great. Thanks, Sunita, Thalia, and Ore for your presentation. And thanks for everyone for submitting your questions. We can take some time now to answer some of your questions that have already been submitted through the chat box. But before doing so, I have one more announcement that I'd like to let you know. Hopefully, can you all see my screen now? Great. So hopefully we will be able to answer all your questions today, but if not, we have another longer Q&A session on December 8th. That's on Tuesday, December 8th at 2 p.m. GMT. You can also register for that one on our website. If you also have more questions, please get in touch with us on our email address. That's immanagrants@lshtm.ac.uk. And we will also send the link for the next webinar registration on the chat box, but also on the follow-up email that we will send later on today or tomorrow. And I will now go and check some of the questions that have already been submitted on the chat box. I can see some of the questions have already been answered through the chat function, but I'll read the first question that we have from Shukwinder, and this is, this is a question probably for Ore or Sunita. So if I applied for a previous round of IMMANA grants, but was not successful, are there any potential risk for applying for the fourth round with the same research proposal?
Hi, Sukhwinder. Hope you're doing well. No, I mean, one is welcome to. We don't have restrictions on how many times people will apply or not apply. What you want to think about is why your grant was not successful in the context of what we are saying now. So, you would have got some responses, and so you want to think carefully about maybe the methodology was not clearly articulated, and maybe then you need to do that on making it more robust, or maybe it was not that novel after all, or it wasn't prioritized. So you want to think about that a bit more carefully as well. And if it in this context, is this one of the key priority areas? So yes, I mean, people are welcome to apply. It's not like we all remember exactly what you all submitted, although we can go back and check. But make sure that it is way more robust. And this time, unlike last time, I think the first two rounds, we didn't propose any priority themes. The third time we did propose the priority themes, and in the end, we ended up funding the best of what we have based on these kinds of various levels of assessments. Whether or not, we were a bit more lenient in how we looked at the proposals in terms of priority themes. Quite lenient, I would argue. But this round being the final round, we will be quite, that would be our priority on how do we mobilize research on these areas is our key focus. So we would be a lot more conservative and strict about how we approach that, which are some of the differences you might want to think about. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Sunita, for that. Second question that we have is from Sherifat, and the question, we got it from email actually. So, would an innovative subject contributing to nutrition and health without an important implication of agriculture or food systems be a good topic for the IMMANA grants?
No, unfortunately, because there are lots of topics that are important for human health and nutrition. And unfortunately, we will not be able to fund those because IMMANA is really focused at the nexus of agriculture, nutrition, and health, human nutrition and human health. Yeah.
Yeah, great. That was straightforward. We have a question from Paulina. This is also a question that was submitted on email, so others can also see it. I'd like to propose the development of a point of care test for the diagnostic of human tuberculosis. The technique, methodology learned through this project has the potential to be further applied to the development of diagnostic tools for other diseases, including zoonotic disease. Would that fit into the program aim?
So it's just a diagnostic about TB? Maybe she could speak up. If it is a diagnostic about TB, then no. Unfortunately, that won't be, because it is just about TB and anyone can have TB. In fact, people living in urban slums and doing nothing about and nothing on agriculture or food systems could be having TB because of various risk factors. So no, but if you're really thinking of, you will have to situate whatever that may be between the, agriculture, again, agriculture, food systems, and we define that rather, as I said, broadly. It has to be situated within that. So if you're really thinking of zoonotic diseases and some diagnostics around that in a way, because that zoonotic disease is important for human nutrition or health outcome, then yes. I mean, we are living in a pandemic, and it is all about where the origins of it and where we end up. So there are links. You need to make that link. Absolutely. Maybe a One Health construct would help, but just TB won't work. Yeah.
Okay, great. We have a question about costing. So this is a question from Ada, and it says, how much can the costing vary from concept note to full proposal? And maybe another question related to also reporting. This is a question from Oliver. Could you please comment on the reporting requirements of the grants?
Hooray, can you take that, please? Yeah.
Yes, so regarding the first question was costing between concept notes and full proposal. So the budget ceiling is £250,000, regardless of whether that's a concept note or full proposal. But if you're talking about, say, for instance, you submit your budget for the concept note stage, and you're then shortlisted to submit a full proposal, whether, I guess the question is saying, can you vary? Can you change your budget from the concept note stage to full proposal? I mean, that's still you can still do that, so long as we see a clear justification, so long as it remains within the same budget limits. It can't be more than £250. But if between when you submit your concept note and you submit your full proposal, there's something that has changed and you have a justification for it, you can do so, but provide a justification as to why that has changed. The other question was regarding reporting requirements. At the full proposal stage, we ask you to outline your project plan, so your sort of quarterly milestones, and to also outline the project deliverables in terms of, what the research, uptake will be, what papers you intend to, to submit and all of that. That all needs to be clearly articulated within in your research uptake and pathway to impact plans. And so your reporting we have a quarter, you report on a quarterly basis, and your reports, are focused on, how your project plan is coming along, and also how you are progressing in the delivery of those sort of the key things that you said you would deliver during your project. And we'll check in on those. And also we have the financial reports. We want to see how you're progressing in terms of the spend of the money. So those are the sort of key reports, your quarterly narrative reports, your quarterly financial reports, but also we're keeping an eye on, how you're going about delivering the sort of key research uptake and impact products as well.
Great, thanks, Ori. We have a question from Aurelie, and it says in the application form there are two options: one, validation, or second, new methods. But in the proposal call, there are three options. It says one, validation; two, innovative proposals under research context to generate new insights; and three, new methods.
Sorry, could you repeat that? I got lost reading.
Yeah, sure. So
I should stop monitoring and yeah.
So it says.
I can answer that if you'd like.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, go ahead, Talia, please.
Sure. So hi, Aurelie. Yes, basically there are sort of two parts to the second group. So there's the pure development, novel pilot testing of ideas, things like that in the first group. And then in the second group, there's validation, but we understand that validation has a very specific meaning in an epidemiological study, and we kind of mean validation in a bit of a broader sense. So we mean that it could be a traditional validation study, but it also could be measuring some cross-cultural application or cross-cultural equivalence. It could be looking at the application of something in a new way to a different context, or adapting it from, for instance, if there's a really well-regarded tool, modifying it from a rural context to an urban context, or to a different type of population, or a certain where there are different dynamics of equity, for instance, something like that. So it's just that we're funding a mix of. It was an even-ish split last time. The final split between the sort of pure development and the more validation and application groups will be decided based on the final selection pool of selection. But they're sort of, it's like group A and then group B.1 and group B.2.
Great, and thanks, Talia, for that. We have more question in the chat box, but I'm just trying to see if there's anyone who wants to ask a question by raising your hands. Please, you can raise your hands by clicking in the participant box, and then I can unmute you. So if anyone wants to ask any question using the audio function, please raise your hands.
So there is a question by I'm just looking in no particular, I mean, after Ada here, there is
okay,
Debritu. There is one by the question on, I have a plan to make a proposal linked with development of supplement of locally available foods for acute malnutrition.
Yeah, I answered that one in the chat.
Oh, good. Okay.
I think that was answered on the chat, but I think I have Alabel Wildeyesis. You can ask your question. I think I've unmuted you. Can you hear us? Okay, I'll go through the chat questions, and then I'll ask your question here.
Hello?
Hello, yes, go ahead, please.
Hi everyone.
Hi.
My name is Arlebel from Ethiopia. I work for the Policy Study Institute. I'm a researcher. I have two questions. The first one is questions on partnership. Can you clarify more on partnership? What do you mean by that? Do you expect us to collaborate with other countries' researchers or within Ethiopia, or for instance, within a country with universities or policy makers or etc. What do you expect us? Is it a mandatory to work with other country universities, for instance, maybe from Tufts University or from other universities? And the question is in terms of budgeting, if the proposal aims to engage policymakers or policy implementers, starting from the inception up to the implementation of the research project, can we budget for their engagement, for instance, in terms of workshop or in terms of identifying some important indicators together with the policymakers. Thank you.
Ray, you want to take that?
Okay. So in terms of partnership, so now if your project is based, in a higher income country, we expect absolutely that, because we expect that the projects are taking place in low middle income countries. We expect that you will have partners in those countries, who you will work with on your project. Now, I guess, Alibel, you're probably in a lower middle income country anyway, and you're asking, okay, do you need to engage anyone from? I think the principle is that we don't expect you to carry out, as an institution, to have all the sort of expertise and disciplines and all of that within your institution. We expect that, in carrying out any project, you will have to come together and collaborate with others who can bring either whether discipline or an expertise, or other things, to your project that would enable you to carry it out. So we expect that you're not just, it's not just an internal thing. So yes, we expect that you collaborate with other institutions to do this. Now, as far as, a budget for engaging policymakers, yes, if you are developing your proposal and you think that that's an important element for your project, then please include a budget, for engaging with policymakers. So in the past, we've seen grantees, they've as part of their project implementation, when disseminating it, they've organized dissemination conferences or workshops for policymakers, to share some of the findings and all of that. So we absolutely encourage that. So please include a budget for that as well.
Great, thanks, Ori, for that. We have one more person who raised his hand. Edith, do you want to go for your question, please?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Thank you so much for this presentation this morning. It's been really helpful. And I have two hopefully quick questions. The first is, if two initial proposals come in that are relatively similar, will you suggest that two different groups work together in a subsequent submission? Because sometimes, you can find better leverages that way. And then the second question I have is about my research area. I'm working with the International Confederation of Dietitians, Dietetics Associations, and we're really looking at the leverage point of dietitians and nutritionists across the world, and how in their various roles throughout the food system, they can leverage change for a positive impact on sustainable and resilient food systems. And using a cultural adaptation model to try to help unpack that and measure it and make it workable. So I'm wondering if looking at that particular population, dietitians and nutritionists, is, and them as change makers, is that acceptable? Or would you rather see us looking at dietitians and this group and this group and this group? Thank you.
So let me take the first cut, and I invite Thalia and Ore to pitch in as well, or Abel, whoever from my team. Your first question is if there are two same kind of proposals. We have never, that's an interesting question, and we have never done that. Maybe because we didn't receive very similar proposals. I hesitate to commit to anything like that for two reasons. One is, we don't know the politics behind those two different groups of researchers and institutions and so on and so forth. And we also don't want to divulge one information on one proposal to another information, because, everything you submit, we are quite careful about how we handle your submission. I'm a researcher for myself, and I work on some of the topics that you submit on. And actually, even I don't see it until the day before the IP meeting or something like that, because I'm quite careful about any conscious, unconscious, any kind of bias from my end, or an understanding that, or a feeling that somehow this process has not been as transparent, accountable, or fair. So we are extremely careful about that. And I would say that I think so far we have a good reputation on that. Mm-hmm. So unlikely that we would do that, because you are competing against each other. Mm-hmm. I don't know. If anyone has any experience on how they've approached this, I'm happy to take any suggestions, but we haven't done that so far. And I haven't felt like these two are so similar. Why are they, that kind of thing. But again, we're open for suggestions if something like that happens. The second one is on dietitians. We don't exclude any group. The idea as if dietitians want to have leverage on say food-based recommendations within planetary health boundaries, let's say that is the question, right? Dietitians alone can't make it. Dietitians can use a tool to establish certain metrics or ways of looking at things, and that's fine. But you alone, when you're coming up with the tool, you probably want to talk to some person who's an expert on biodiversity in that country, or how to bring biodiversity with climate change versus nutritionists versus the economists, because economics plays a huge role. So I would find it hard to think that dietitians alone, or anybody alone other than, for example, would be meaningfully affecting change, either in measurement, metric, or policy, without really engaging other stakeholders, because you have a policy agenda. So I would urge you to think about, it may be a tool for dietitians, but you want to express how that relates, how anyone should care other than a dietitian about this tool, and how using that in order to have credence for the tool and engage other stakeholders, so that you are actually able to bring those changes. You want to think carefully about your stakeholder group, who is involved in that research, and what the tool comprises of. If it is just for dietitians and some nutrition tool, that is not one of our priority areas. Right. But if you put it in their different context and articulation, that could be our priority area. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Great.
Athalia, you want to add anything on that, or?
Not particularly. I think that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. I'll go to some more questions from the chat box, and then if we have more time, I'll also give you one more chance to raise your hands and ask more questions. So we have one question from Nuruben, and this question is: I have a plan to make a proposal related to study the climate smart agricultural practice for coastal areas. Is it welcome for one funding? So proposal related to study the climate smart agricultural practice for coastal areas. Is that within the IMMANA grants funding theme?
Again, you will have to ask, it's not out of it, you know, but then how would you relate? But the question is, you might want to articulate what that question is. That's a big topic, right? So if you're really thinking of, so I don't know what your methods, metrics, or tools question is, but here is how I would, if it is a question on, does this climate smart agriculture practice technology approach improve resilience to food security? No, it's not within the IMMANA context because that's a research question. But if you're saying, how will I measure resilience and in a coastal area and use this context to define that, then it could be, because it's a tool that you're developing, then it is there, right? So you want to think about what you're asking and how you're asking and cast that as a method, metric, or a tool question. Again, if you're look at the priority, maybe you want to think of, maybe I'm even giving answers, but I don't know how else to make this more less abstract and more tangible. So for example, if it is not in any of the priority lists, you want to think about how can I make a priority? So if for me, I would say, okay, can there be a surveillance of resilience, for example? Is there a, you know, so that it can be an early warning system to act faster. And we don't have many of those beyond maybe WFP's VAM at that scale. So you want to think about it in a way that, because a lot of people are thinking of resilience and the topic itself is not innovative either. So you want to think about what is the innovation angle and also the priority, either a methodological priority angle or a thematic priority angle. Ideally, it would be great if you have both, but it's a bit too much to ask for perhaps. So you want to think about those kinds of issues.
Perfect. Thanks, Sunita, for that explanation. We have a question about eligibility country, and this is a question from Clifton. Is Papua New Guinea an eligible country for this call or for this funding? Ore, do you have a country list for this, or this is something that we can come back on email for confirmation?
Yes, I can confirm that Papua New Guinea is definitely eligible. The list of countries that are not eligible are quite small. If you have a look on the FAQ, you'll see them there, but there are only a handful of countries that can't be funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation because they have sanctions by the US. But for the most part, most countries, including Papua New Guinea, can be funded.
Perfect. Thanks, Ori. We have one question about secondary data analysis. So it's a question from Nimat. Do you fund secondary data analysis? And some related question by Gloria. Example, personal salaries to validate a tool with no new data collection.
Talia, you want to take that? I feel like I'm talking a lot.
Sorry, I was answering another question. Can you repeat that for me?
It's okay. I can answer. Don't worry. Yes, we can. We can fund secondary data collection. Do we fund secondary data collection? Secondary data analysis. We have done that in the past, quite a few. If you take a look at our grants website and even in the round 3 where we have not announced yet. Yes.
Perfect. So the answer is yes. I have quite a few questions on the chat box. We still have 15 minutes. So I'm just trying to see if more people wants to ask a question by raising their hands. Please raise your hands and then we will unmute you. Anyone who wants to ask a question about the IMMANA grants round 4.
I was just writing an answer to Romancia Dermawan and about the indigenous plant as an herbal food from Indonesia. I think we really focus very specifically on the linkages between agriculture and nutrition. So for sort of medicinal plants, that might be a bit outside the scope of IMMANA if it's not shown to provide sort of very important and missing nutrient at a human nutrition level. If you can argue why, and we remember that we really fund research tools, metrics, and methods. So we don't fund implementation tools, metrics, and methods. While there are many, many innovations that we do need for implementation of programs and policies, we really do focus on research and the ways that we need to better elucidate the connections between agriculture, nutrition, and health. So just remember, from the agricultural side, we really don't fund implementation.
So, one more thing, there's also a related question, somewhat in that same vein, is if they're going to, I don't remember who it is, but I don't want to scroll up and lose track of what I'm saying, is about fish, and if they're trying to have better breeding of fish. Again, that falls outside the remit. We don't do, in this context, we, again, that is how to breed fish is not, it's of course, in some sense, everything is a method or a metric in research, I suppose. But we don't do that kind of breeding research, just as, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. One question about collaboration. This is a question from Haptamu. And it says, is there a contact professor for collaboration from IMMANA? I'm assuming if IMMANA can be a collaborator.
I don't know. Maybe they can clarify on the chat box or on by unmuting.
Yeah, Haptamu, if you're still online, I will try to see, and I will unmute you so you can a bit elaborate the question. Oh, I don't think so. They're online at the moment. Okay.
If someone comes to us and says, do you know anybody? I mean, it's not like we know the universe, but we know who we know, and we can check from our networks and also from the AN. One resource is the ANH Academy database. And you might want to then look up, based on your expertise or country or whatever, if you're looking for any collaborators, you want, a ecologist, or somebody in Nigeria. So you might want to, that could be your first cut option. You could write to us, but no promises. We are all researchers and network. From that angle, of course, we can see if we know anybody. But we can't guarantee for the nature of collaborations and stuff like that at this point. Yeah.
Okay, great. Junior, I can see you've raised your hand, so I'm just going to unmute you. So if you can hear us, please go ahead and ask your question. Junior Muka. Hello, Junior. Can you unmute yourself and ask?
Sorry, I chose to stay muted by mistake. My apologies. Yeah, my name my name is Junior, and I'm actually not from a agriculture, nutrition, and health background. I'm from an information management and information sciences background. My research is more around data and analytics in support data and analytics for food composition data in support for health, nutrition, and agriculture. Would such a research qualify for the grant that you guys are issuing?
It's definitely not one of our priority areas. We know that there are a lot of other initiatives that do that, so this is not something that we would be focusing on. I know FAO itself has a huge program on that, so, or at least it's very visible.
All right, thank you.
That, yeah.
Thanks.
Great. Abel, can I answer this one question about from Ada about sorry, where is it?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Would you expect to have a pathway to develop a metric? This is particularly difficult for qualitative research. I'm not sure I actually understand the question, because usually you wouldn't develop a metric from a qualitative study, but you could, I suppose. I mean, it could certainly inform that. They could be linked. But I suppose, I'm not sure, like from a pathway perspective as far as metrics, if you take, for instance, the WEA, the Women's Empowerment in Agriculture Index, that was specifically developed because there was this node on the pathway from agriculture where it's like I mean, it goes sort of through, it's mediated by or moderated by women's empowerment and their time use and the different ways that people make decisions within households, and et cetera. So that was specifically developed because there was really a dearth of metrics to measure that specific place on the pathway. Now, one interesting thing is that for the WEA, for instance, when we coded it on the map, it's not specifically linked to nutrition, but it's very much thought of within that context because it is linked, it sort of shows, it's sort of the precursor to differential outcomes for nutrition and health, right? So whether it's qualitative or quantitative, it is sort of discrete, it measures one thing, but it is within the context of that theoretical pathway and very much developed with that in mind. So I think you can always link it to these theoretical pathways that are pretty established at this point and show that they do work that way or don't work that way. It's not that these pathways are, they don't dictate. What happens is it's the factors that should be considered, the context that should be considered that lead to those outcomes. You can always situate it within that. And I would say that that's true for both quantitative and qualitative research. You can always situate it within theory and within what's already been practically done, proposed, tested, etc. So I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, please feel free to clarify.
Great. Thanks for answering that question, Thalia. I saw Vanisha raising your hand. So if you still want to ask your question, I'm going to unmute you.
Hello, good evening.
Yes, please, go ahead.
So I had this question of is this topic okay for the grant or not? And what I plan to do is to understand regional agricultural practices, food anthropology and cuisines for sustainable food system using participatory research method and other qualitative methods. So will this topic be okay?
So from there are two questions. Is the method, what is the method, metric, or tool, right? I mean, and then the topic. The topic
Yes.
itself is not a priority area in terms of the way it has been articulated, in terms of, I think, cuisines, you said. So that is not what we are focusing on. But if really you're thinking of how do we understand the nexus of sustainability and diets of people in this context that you're talking about, and how can you develop a participatory methodology around that, then that would be, again, within IMMANA remit. Suddenly you're combining the priority theme of participatory research, and you're really talking in the context of agriculture and nutrition. Now, I just want to raise one issue for everyone that is beyond just this, is the kind of method, metric, or tool when we are talking about is someone else should be able to use it, right? I mean, so for example, when a qualitative tool is being developed, you want it to be developed in a way that you have, it could be a framework, it could be a series of, I don't know, actually, I never developed a qualitative methodological tool, method, or a metric. So So I'm trying to think for example, one of the good ones is photo voice. That has come up quite a bit, right? How do you do photo voice? What does it get you or not do? And now that has been taken up by other people. We didn't fund anything. It just emerged as, I'm just giving you an example here. And while photo voice existed elsewhere from many, many, many decades ago to now, it is being applied to food environments, right? So quite a lot in that context. So you can think of, okay, how do I develop this tool so that if I do this research in this context as your research question, that there is guidance and there is a way of other people to use this method metric or tool. And this is also the reason why the modelers among you may also want to be careful, because this has come up from our own experience of funding heavy modeling work, which has been great, but also I think what is important and is one of the reasons why that much of modeling, certain kinds of modeling didn't make it this time, although they were like super interesting. And I would love to work on some of those studies, is that it looks like there are only 3 people in the world that can do that. And these are the 3 people that applied, and it is going to stay like that, however fabulous that is. Right. And so to us, the translation from research from that group to another research through a larger research body, other academics, other researchers, or to policy or programmers, practitioners, is important. It has to be translatable to at least one of these communities and be used by one of these communities. So just saying, I'll develop this fancy model and I'll develop a toolkit, that's not going to sound convincing. You really want to then say how you're going to do that and how you're going to invest in that, right? I mean, so that is something. Same thing with participatory methods. You can't be the, a fabulous anthropologist can't be the only person doing that. You want to then engage and develop a tool, some sort of methodology or a method that can be transferred to other stakeholders so that they can use it. Because the idea is to populate and make available these methods, metrics, and tools. So have that in your framework as you're thinking of this, which is the translational value and transferability of your method metric or tool. Does that answer your question, Manisha? That's a lot I said in, related or not related to your question. So
great. Thanks, Sunita. I think I'm going through the chat questions that we've organized, and it looks like we have actually answered all of them, either on the live session or through the chat box. So just going to give you a chance, Sunita or Italia, if you have any last minute message or anything to add. But if not, I think that will bring us to the end of this webinar. I would like to thank Sunita or Italia for your time and for your presentation, but also for all our participants for asking the questions. Please don't forget to join us again on December 8th for another Q&A session. So that'll be at 2 p.m. GMT. We will share the link with you in the chat box. We will also include it in the follow-up email. You can also find it on the website. Once again, thank you very much for joining us, and good luck in applying.
Thank you. Thanks everyone.
Thanks everyone, and good luck. All the best.
Bye.